Hey friends, this is Pastor Joe from Southwest Lutheran Church, and I've got some discipleship thoughts to follow up on our message from this Sunday, April 30th. We were talking about 1 Peter chapter 2, and the Apostle Peter is teaching us about living godly lives in the midst of a society that is very different from a Christian foundation society that we're used to kind of living in, right? We've talked about this, how a Christian church has very much shaped our American society. And for a long, long time, many of us grew up in a society where really the church was at the center of society. The church's values got the most respect. The church's opinions were listened to. And really the church could have its way in many ways. That's no longer the case. And we're not quite on the margin of society, but we're somewhere in between the center and the margin. And who knows whether the church will continue going towards the margin of society or will somehow return back toward the center of society. But, you know, what we wanted to share on Sunday was that we should not be afraid of being on the margin of society as Christians, because in fact, that's the entire New Testament context. Peter, in 1 Peter, his letter, is teaching us how to live faithfully, even from the margin of society, because in fact, that's kind of the normal situation for the early church. And so we do not need to be afraid of this, because we are always free to live faithfully as the people of God, but especially from the margin of society. We're free to speak the truth without too much concern for what's going to happen to us. We're free to care for people on the margin of society, those widows, those orphans, those outcasts whom God seems to have a special care for, right? And at the same time, we want to be thinking biblically about these things, not just politically, right? And so here's kind of our main verse from the message on Sunday. It's 1 Peter chapter 2, starting with the second half of verse 20, where the apostle says this: "If you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." Jesus rescued us by suffering for us. For us as the people of God, if we are out of step with the world, well, that's kind of what we should expect. And if we suffer for doing good, we should not be surprised about that, because that's what happened to Jesus. But just as Jesus' suffering is redemptive, and it's through his wounds that we are healed, our doing good and suffering for doing good and bearing up under that suffering can be restorative, redemptive for our families and our neighbors and our communities, because it's through our lives of faith and faithfulness that the good news of Jesus is proclaimed, and even the commitment that the Holy Spirit gives to us, the fact that we are willing to suffer for doing good, that says a lot to the world around us. And after all, the early Christians, when the world looked at them, they said, look at how they love one another. Even in the midst of suffering, in the midst of persecution, those Christians were different. So, what do we take away from this? What is Jesus calling us to do? Is to live differently, right? And to be confident living differently, even if we are at the margin of society. Don't be afraid of that, but be willing to be different. Don't let that bother you. That's what I take away. I can be free to live faithfully as a follower of Jesus, even when that places me in a different sort of place, when I'm not at the center of society or influence or power or control, all those sorts of things. Being Christian may take me away from the center of society and power and influence and control. I don't need to worry about that. I need to worry about doing good, living faithfully, following Jesus. I'd love to hear what you take from that passage or from the wider chapter of 1 Peter chapter 2. I'd love to talk about that. So hey, throw your comments, throw your questions, throw your takeaways for discipleship in the comments below, and I'd love to have a conversation. So hey, until next time, take care, God bless, have a great day.